Welcome to this video presentation on Desk Review Recruitment. My name is Kevin McMahon, Pool of Experts Manager at the UNOPS Peace and Security Cluster. There are three interrelated purposes to this presentation. First, we're going to look at basic facts about desk reviews. Then, we're going to look at compliance standards. The final purpose is for you to learn how to do the desk review minutes in a systematic and methodical way. Here's a more detailed look at the format of the presentation. First, we're going to look at basic facts to make sure we're all on the same page. Second, we're going to look at compliance standards. Third, we're going to familiarize ourselves with the desk review template. Lastly, we're going to look at a case study in which we'll do an entire desk review recruitment from start to finish. Here are the steps, and we'll go through them one by one. They may not make much sense now, but they will as we go through the presentation. Okay, so let's get started. So let's start with the most fundamental question. What is a desk review? A desk review is a recruitment modality that allows us to hire someone on an ICA contract for up to 100 working days and for a maximum contract value of $50,000 by reviewing and comparing CVs only. We don't have to post a vacancy announcement, administer a technical assessment, or perform interviews. So, when should you use a desk review? There are generally two situations in which desk reviews are useful. The first is when you need to recruit someone quickly. The second is when you only need someone for a short-term, one-time job. Here are some other key features. They can be used for international ICAs or local ICAs. They cannot be used for staff contracts, like fixed-term appointments or temporary appointments. They don't need to be cleared by LCPC. The maximum contract value within the 100 days cannot exceed US $50,000. The 100 days are working days and don't include weekends. This means that a desk review actually works out to about 135 calendar days, or 4.5 months. A contractor can only have one 100-day contract within a 12-month period. However, they can be extended for an additional 100 days and up to $100,000 within one calendar year. Let's take a look at this last point in more detail. To recap, a person can only have one 100-day contract per 12-month period. However, if this person is still needed, the Talent Management Framework lets you extend her contract to 200 days and up to $100,000 by taking from the next 12-month period. Visually, it looks like this. There is an important cost to doing this though, and that is that this person cannot be hired using the desk review modality for any position at all during the next 12-month period. So let's talk compliance. The terms of reference must be classified. All candidates must meet the minimum requirements. You must consider a minimum of 2 candidates. There must be a minimum of 3 assessment criteria. We'll get into this a bit later. It must be a valid comparison. This means that all candidates must be able to score points in most, if not all, of the assessment criteria. All candidates must have updated CVs. CVs must be sufficiently detailed regarding task descriptions and employment dates. There must be a threshold for passing. The assessment panel requirements are slightly different from normal ICA recruitment. For desk reviews, all you need is a convener and 1 technical expert. The members must be at the same or higher level than the post in question, and the panel members must have at least 1 year of UN experience. Reference checks must be done, and education credentials must be verified. Okay, so let's get familiar with the territory. The template is divided into 6 sections. Sections 1, 2, and 3 are fairly straightforward. Section 1, key information, very self-explanatory. Section 2, shortlisted candidates. These are the candidates that you will be considering for your desk review. 3, in minimum requirements, just cut and paste from the terms of reference. Section 4 is a bit more complicated, and we'll learn how to do it in a few minutes, but in short, assessment criteria are the things you're going to use to evaluate the candidates. The weights are the numerical values that you will give to each criterion. Down here in panel discussion, a professional summary is simply a short paragraph describing a candidate's professional background, and the rationale for recommendation is a more complex set of paragraphs that shows why you're recommending one candidate over the other or others. Again, this will all become very clear in the slides to come. This last section is fairly straightforward. Just fill in the blanks and check off the boxes. So here's our case study. We're going to recruit a program officer, ECA 1, for Central African Republic. Our candidates are Joan Jett, candidate number 1, and candidate number 2 is Angus Young. Here are the duties and responsibilities. You can pause the video here if you want to go through them in more detail. And here are the requirements. So let's complete the basic information. So let's fill this out. In section 1, just going to put in the title, level, duty station, date, have the terms of reference been classified? Yes. CVs are less than 1 year old? Yes. Threshold for passing, 70%. Put in our short list of candidates, Joan Jett, Angus Young. And for section 3, you're just going to cut and paste the minimum requirements. So there we go. The reason that this section exists is to prevent you from using the minimum requirements as assessment criteria, which we'll get into later. And I'm just going to put in the names down here in the assessment grid. So let's move on now to establishing potential assessment criteria. Let's begin first by discussing some of the general rules around assessment criteria. First and foremost, assessment criteria must be tangible or concrete. In other words, it must be something that can be evaluated simply by reviewing the CVs while sitting at your desk, hence the name, desk review. Let me show you what I mean by comparing some examples of tangible and non-tangible criteria. Here are some examples of tangible criteria. All of these things are tangible items because they can be confirmed simply by looking at the resume. Here are some examples of non-tangible criteria. I hope that you can see the difference. For example, how could you confirm that someone has good communication skills by looking at her CV, or has the ability to work in a multicultural environment? Quite simply, you can't. Here's a tip. If your criterion begins with the word experience, then it most likely fulfills this tangibility requirement. Besides tangibility, assessment criteria must relate to the functions of the job and be present in the CVs of the candidates you are considering. It also cannot be one of the mandatory requirements. Instead, it must be some desired experience over and above the minimum requirements. For example, it could be specific experience in the duty station in question, specialized report writing, experience with certain donors, and the list goes on. As you'll see in the next few slides, you have a lot of latitude when coming up with assessment criteria. Okay, let's get down to specifics. When establishing assessment criteria, the first thing to do is start with the obvious. Since this post is for Central African Republic, it would be good if candidates had experience working in Sub-Saharan Africa, so I'll use this as a potential criterion. Another useful criterion could be knowledge of local languages or dialects, so I'll put that one in as well. Another one that comes to mind is experience working in post-conflict countries, since Central African Republic is still in this phase of its development. Lastly, since UNOPS is the UN, previous experience with the UN would be handy too. Before I go on to the next slide, I just want to say that this tool that I'm using, which I call the Potential Assessment Criteria Grid, is a very powerful one, and I strongly encourage you to use it. Once you're done with the obvious, take a look at the desired requirements in the terms of reference for ideas on additional assessment criteria. Let's take a look. So here are the requirements, and I can see that there are 3. We have experience in humanitarian affairs and experience in mine action is desirable. Knowledge of UN policy mine action policy is desirable, and previous experience in donor reporting and preparing project proposals is desirable. So I'm just going to highlight those three. So returning back to the potential assessment criteria grid, I'm going to translate those desired requirements like this: experience in mine action and experience drafting reports to donors. After considering the obvious and looking at the desired requirements in the terms of reference, you can look at the duties and specific tasks in the terms of reference for even more ideas for assessment criteria. After looking through the terms of reference, I can see a number of possibilities. However, the two strongest ones that stand out to me are this one, provide logistical and substantive support for visits of donors and other delegations, and this one, actively engage in public information initiatives and maintain close working relationships with UN partner agencies on public information activities. And I'll just translate those like this: experience organizing large, high-profile delegations, experience conducting public information campaigns. So let's discuss now how to identify candidates for the position. There are a number of ways to identify candidates for your position. First, check within your professional network for referrals. Of course, candidates who are referred aren't given any special treatment, but it's a great way to start. You can also search GPRS for similar positions that you've had access to in the past. You can look through the applications for potential applicants. You can also ask your local HR officer to help you find potential candidates, either through previous similar positions or technical rosters that she may have access to. This is the most common way, as HR officers tend to have access to a wide variety of positions and CVs. You can also post the position on GPRS as a means of attracting applicants. If you do this, you need to post it for a minimum of 7 days, so if you're in a rush, this might not be the best route. Another great resource is iPass. They have access to a vast array of GPRS profiles. This next part is pretty easy. So in this case study, we found two suitable comparison CVs. One of them is for Ms. Joan Jett, and the other is for Mr. Angus Young. After reviewing their CVs, I see that they satisfy the criteria in this way. Choosing final assessment criteria is very simple and fast. All you need to do is identify the criteria that is satisfied by both candidates. In this case, it is these. Now, just because they overlap in 5 areas, it doesn't mean that you have to choose all 5 as assessment criteria. The minimum is 3. For this case study, though, and after consulting the terms of reference again and consulting with key stakeholders, I've concluded that 4 criteria are really important for evaluating candidates for this position. And here are the 4 that I have chosen. Establishing weights for assessment criteria and scoring the candidates is another tricky aspect of this process. Unfortunately, there is no universally systematic way to do this. It pains me to say this because, as anyone will tell you, I'm a huge fan of objectively derived evidence. But sadly, from a practical standpoint, it simply isn't feasible. This means that we'll have to content ourselves with using a holistic method, or simply what feels right. When establishing values for assessment criteria, you simply need to use your best judgment to determine what each criterion will get. Obviously, if something is more important in your mind, then assign it more weight or greater value. The values that you assign to the assessment criteria must equal 100. When scoring the candidates, you have to use a similarly holistic approach, awarding scores that broadly reflect their respective experiences as stated in their CVs. After thinking carefully about the relative importance of each criterion, I've concluded that this is the most sensible distribution of the values. As you can see, they add up to 100, and based on my analysis of the candidates' experience as shown in their CVs only, the candidates achieved these scores. I can see that Joan Jett has achieved a higher weighted score than Angus Young, so she will be the candidate that I recommend. I can also see that Angus Young passes the threshold of 70%, so he is an alternate candidate. So now, I'm just going to insert her name up here in the field for recommended candidate, Joan Jett, and Angus's name here in the field for alternate candidate. Okay, so moving on to professional summaries. To recap, a professional summary is simply a short paragraph describing a candidate's professional background. This is a very simple task and can be written quickly. Here are the basic guidelines and steps. First, it doesn't have to be too long, about 50 to 70 words. Then you're just going to talk about the person's nationality, her education, her current occupation, along with which organization it was with and which country it was in, and then a bit about the type of experience they have and the number of years of experience. Based on my imaginary CVs of the two candidates, here's what their professional summaries look like. And you can just pause the video here if you'd like to have a closer look. To recap, the rationale for recommendation is a more complex set of paragraphs that shows why you're recommending one candidate over the other or others. This is the most important part of the exercise because it shows that a proper evaluation was done and that a comparison was made. It's proof that a candidate wasn't chosen arbitrarily. Instead, it shows that the process was deliberate, logical, objective, transparent, and fair. It should be a verbal reflection of what was recorded in the assessment grid. This is important. In our assessment grid, it mentions mine action experience, UN experience, donor reporting, and working in post-conflict zones. Therefore, it's important that our rationale for recommendation speak to these points. I think you would agree with me that it wouldn't make much sense to talk about candidates' experience in logistics or public communications, since we didn't put these in the assessment grid. The length should be about 250 to 300 words in total. Regarding the format, you should lead off with an introductory paragraph that indicates clearly who is being recommended, followed by 2 paragraphs, one each for the candidates. Based on these guidelines, here's what my rationale for recommendation looks like. You can see that I start off with a very short paragraph indicating clearly that Ms. Joan Jett is the recommended candidate. You'll see that in the last paragraph, where I discuss Mr. Young, I not only describe his experience, but compare it to that of Ms. Jett, indicating that while he is a strong candidate as well, he is not as suitable as Ms. Jett. This last part is pretty basic. All you're going to do is just fill in the blanks like this. Before wrapping this up, I'd like to mention some final considerations about desk reviews. While they don't pertain to actually writing the desk review itself, they are nevertheless important for you to consider. If on the rare chance that the post is ECA 4, the position itself needs to be cleared by PCG and 1 UNOPS, so make sure to build this into your timeline. For some duty stations, they won't admit visitors to the country unless they have certain vaccinations, so make sure that your recommended candidate has these. In Mali, for example, they won't let you in unless you show proof of yellow fever vaccination. Make sure you have a technical expert lined up who can sign off on the minutes. We had a case once for a highly specialized IT post, and it took us a long time to find a qualified technical expert. Lastly, check to see if the incumbent needs a visa for the duty station, as this can take a long time to get. I hope you've enjoyed this video manual on how to write desk review minutes. You should now have all the tools and knowledge on how to recruit people using this modality. I realize that the way I've shown may seem long and cumbersome, but it's actually much quicker than it looks. As long as you're systematic and methodical in the process, you will achieve excellence in your desk review recruitments. Thanks for your attention and happy recruiting.